Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum dear students. I'm your teacher Simin Amer and today I'm here again with a new lecture. I hope everything is going well at your side. Let's start today's lecture. This is my lecture number 23 for grade pre-O. Today we have a history class and we have already started chapter number 6. In the previous lecture, we learned about the Indian Council Act 1909, which is commonly known as the Morley-Minto or the Minto-Morley reforms. It was an act of Parliament of the United Kingdom that brought about a limited increase in the involvement of Indians in the governance of British India. The reforms included the admission of Indians to the Secretary of State's Council, to the Viceroy's Executive Council, and to the Executive Councils of Bombay and Madras, and the introduction of an elected element into legislative councils with provision for separate electorates for the Muslims. Then we learnt about the partition of Bengal was reversed, and there were so many reasons, like the authorities were not able to end the protest of Indians who started some of the movements like Swadeshi movement, and it was the boycott of the British goods, and this protest assented to reversing the partition and did so in 1911. King George announced in December 1911 that Eastern Bengal would be assimilated into the Bengal Presidency. District where Bengali was spoken were once again unified, and Assam, Bihar, and Orissa were separated. So finally, we can say in 1911, the British government revoked the partition of Bengal, and the capital was shifted from Calcutta to Delhi. East and West Bengal were reunited. So today the topic is Lucknow Pact 1916, and it was a cooperation between the Muslim League and the Congress. The failure of the British to grant more rights to the Indians in the period up to 1914 and their policy of repression during the war had moved Congress and the Muslim League closer together. In 1915, thanks partly to the persuasion of Muhammad Ali Jinnah, who was a prominent member of the Muslim League, the two organizations both held their annual sessions in Bombay. At the same time, joint councils of Congress and the League were set up to improve common understanding between them on key issues. So Qaid-e-Azam was the one who succeeded in persuading both Congress and Muslim League. In 1930, the Qaid-e-Azam's inclusion in the Muslim League was a historic event which gave new dimensions to Muslim League struggle. He was a great advocate of Hindu-Muslim unity and was widely respected in Muslim League and the Congress. When the British realized that they needed to take steps to ensure that they did not have serious political unrest in India at the same time as they were fighting a war against Germany and its allies, so in October 1916 they let it be known that they were considering a series of proposals which would lead to at least half of the members of the executive councils being elected. The legislative councils have a majority of elected members. So both Congress and League supported these proposals. Their agreement also helped to draw the two parties closer together. Although Congress and the League realized that if further concessions were to be gained, they had to develop greater cooperation between themselves. Concessions means as a reward. When they were fighting in the World War for the British, they were actually expecting some of the concessions, some of the rewards from the British authorities. In 1916, they once again held their annual sessions in the same city, Lucknow, largely as a result of the support of the two leaders, Jinnah from the Muslim League and Mahajan from Congress. The Lucknow Pact was drawn up. It showed clearly that Congress was prepared to make concessions to gain the support of the League. In it, Congress agreed that one-third seats for Muslim in the Imperial Legislative Council. They also agreed with the separate electorate, and that was the great achievement for the Muslims. Half members of the Executive Council should be Indians to be elected by the Imperial Legislative Council, and the commissioned ranks of the army for Indians, also for the expansion of the provincial legislative. These were major concessions by Congress, and they showed how keen it was to gain the support of the League. Congress leaders had objected strongly the principles of separate electorates being included in the parliamentary reforms, and this was the first time that they had moved away from their belief that India was one indivisible nation. So they themselves granted the separate electorates to the Muslims in the Lucknow Pact. So Jinnah played a major role in the Lucknow Pact, as Jinnah was the principal architect of the Lucknow Pact and was hailed as an ambassador of Hindu-Muslim unity. He presided over the League session at Lucknow in December 1916. Jinnah said to the Hindus, our attitude should be of goodwill and brotherly feelings. Congress was disappointed with the parliamentary reforms, and they described the parliamentary reforms as disappointing and inadequate and totally with no use. So they actually wanted to come closer towards the Muslim League. That's why they were agreed with so many points for the gains of the Muslims in the Lucknow Pact. The main gains from Muslims' point of view were like separate electorates, which were previously condemned by the Congress, and now this time Congress themselves granted these separate electorates to Muslims. One-third Muslim seats in the central legislation, an unofficial bill. If opposed by three-fourths members of a community, it will not be passed. So these were the main gains for the Muslim community. The main achievements of the Lucknow Pact were like the greater association of the Indians in all branches of government, and responsible government induction of Indians in the commission ranks. So the pact also included a set of common demands of the British as to how India should be governed. It said that the number of elected seats on the councils should be increased. Motions which were passed by large majorities in the councils should be accepted as binding by the British government. Minorities in all provinces should be protected, and all provinces should have autonomy. Autonomy means self-authority, self-government. Importance of Lucknow Pact. The Lucknow Pact was a significant and very important movement in the movement towards the self-rule. It was the first time that the Hindus and Muslims had made a joint demand for political reforms to the British. It marked the first acceptance by the Hindus that the decree of partition would be necessary in any self-governing India, as Congress was in a demand of collective partition, collective independence. But Muslim League were in demand of partition, because we took the theory of Sir Syed Ahmad Khan that we are not the same or the single nation in the subcontinent. So as we are two different nations, there should be two different states in subcontinent after independence from British rule. So that was the first time, by the acceptance of Hindus in Congress, that there should be a partition in this self-governing India. As they granted us this, they granted separate electorates for the Muslims. It showed that the Muslim acknowledged that they stood much more chance of protecting their rights if they worked with Congress against the British. It led to a growing belief in India that home rule or self-government was a real possibility now. During 1917, two home rule leagues campaigned across India. One was led by Tilak and the other by an Englishwoman called Annie Besant. She was imprisoned later by the British in June 1917, but she was released in August after a great public outcry. She was then elected Congress president, and in the same month, the Montagu, who was like the Under Secretary of State for India, announced in the British House of Commons that the British policy was an increasing association of Indians in every branch of the administration until India was ready to govern itself as part of the British Empire. The pact marked the high water mark of Hindu Muslim unity. It was to be short lived. However, as the consequences of the Amritsar massacre and the Khilafat movement led to a more communal approach to politics. So that was the first time when Hindus and Muslims came together and they worked for each other. So the reaction of the Hindus and the Muslims over the um, Lucknow Pact. The Hindus of the United Provinces expressed their resentment because it granted separate electorates to the Muslims of India. As I said, that was the first time that Congress themselves granted this separate electorates to the Muslims of India, which was not like not bearable for many of the Hindus. All India Hindu Mahasabha also did the same. Muslims belonging to the Sir Syed school of thoughts in the Punjab and United Provinces went against the Lucknow Pact. But the Lucknow Pact was important because of these following reasons. It was a unity between the Muslims and Hindus. It was a unity within the Indian National Congress. This was the pressure on British government and it was the necessity to pacify Indians. British realized that there is a need to pacify Indians. On 20th August 1917, in August Declaration, British declared that self-governing institute will be gradually developed. So the next topic is the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. These reforms were given by the two British officials. Edwin Samuel Montagu, he was the Secretary of State for India. And the Lord Chelmsford, he was the Viceroy of India between 1916 and 1921. This was the time of World War I when Lord Montagu and Lord Chelmsford came to India. Revolutionary activities were at peak, and everyone in India was looking at the British administration for concessions after the World War I finishes, as Gandhiji has given a call to help the Allies. So, in November 1917, the Viceroy of India, Lord Chelmsford, and the newly promoted Secretary of State, Lord Montagu, carried out a fact finding tour of India. After discussion with local leaders in July 1919, they issued the Montagu Chelmsford Report, which is sometimes called as the Montfort Report. In order to pacify the Indians, the Montagu-Chelmsford reform came in 1919. It introduced the diarchy system, which was a kind of double government in the provinces. The provincial government was to be divided into two parts, one to be responsible to the Indian electorate through the legislature and the other to the governor. So the two leaders stated that a system of government should be introduced in India which gave some measure of responsibility to representatives chosen by the electorates. So the Montagu-Chelmsford report proposed the Legislative Council should now be known as the Legislative Assembly. It would have 145 members, of which 103 should be elected for a period of 3 years. There should be separate electorates for Muslims and Sikhs, with 32 reserved for Muslims only. The Council of State would have 60 members, 33 of whom would be elected. A Council of Princes was set up with 108 members to allow the princes to debate matters of importance. but it had no power, and some princes did not even bother to attend what was little more than a talking shop. And the role in the central administration for the Indians was further restricted by the power of the viceroy, who could still pass any law he chose. If he felt it was necessary for the safety of India, also the Executive Council was still made up of only nominated members, although three of these were now to be Indian. In the provinces, a new system of diarchy was introduced. Under this system, area of responsibility were divided into two lists. Diarchy was a system by which some powers were reserved and controlled by the governor of the provinces appointed by the viceroy. Other powers were transferred to the provincial legislative councils. Diarchy means the system of the double government, or we can say the governed by two independent authorities. So here it was under like a diarchy, there was a central subjects and the provincial subjects. For the provincial subjects, there were transfer subjects and the reserve subjects. The transferred power under the control of Indian ministers were education, health service, agriculture, local government, public works, and reserved powers under the control of viceroy and executive councils were law and order, finance and tax, judges and courts, general administration, and civil services. So, as they took all the reserve power, the British authority, so they took all the important agencies like the law and order, finance, the taxes, judges, courts, everything they kept in their hands, and uh, mm, the rest of the departments were given to the Indian ministers. All the important organizations were under the members of the executive councils because they were in the hand of British officials. For the reserved subjects, like they were administered by the governors with the help of executive council, and the transferred subjects were dealt with by the governors with the help of his ministers. So members of the executive councils were nominated by the governor. The ministers were chosen by the governor from the members of the legislature. The system of diarchy was worked in the provinces from 1921 to 1937, but experience shows that it did not work satisfactorily. Many factors were responsible for its failure. The division of the department or subjects were not properly distributed. No cooperation between the two halves of the provincial administration. Sometimes the ministers and executive councils condemned each other in public. The ministers were the representatives of the people, while members of executive councils belonged to the officials. The non-cooperation between ministers and executive councils led to so many disturbances in administration. Generally, governor backed the members of the executive council. Minister was responsible to the legislative for the administration of his department. He could be turned out by the legislature by a vote of non-confidence. The Montagu-Chelmsford reforms were set out in a Government of India Act of 1919. If the British thought that they would be welcomed with enthusiasm by the grateful Indian population, they were mistaken. Many Indians had fought with the British in the war and they expected much greater concessions. Congress and League had recently come together calling for self rule, and they were bitterly disappointed by the new structure that was given by the British authorities. They had signed a Lucknow Pact and they came together, though which they were against the British authorities. At a special session of Congress in August 1918, the reforms were condemned as inadequate, unsatisfactory, and disappointing. Only the moderates in Congress supported the measures and they were soon excluded from the party. It was true that the local people had more say in how their country was governed, but in reality, The British maintained their grip on power by ensuring that the viceroy had the authority to control how India was governed. There was also one other unexpected outcome of the reforms. The British had reluctantly accepted separate electorates for the Muslims. Soon the non Brahmins, the Sikhs, and the Eurasians were calling for concessions too because they were also in minorities, so they asked for their own concessions. As these were granted, the divisions within Indian society were increasingly emphasized. Now here is your assignment. You have to do two questions. The first question is what was diarchy, and this is for 4 marks. So you have to explain what is diarchy. The second question is why do you think Congress described the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms as inadequate, unsatisfactory and disappointing? So these are your two questions. You have to do them in your neat notebook. Thank you so much dear students for watching this video. We'll meet up again with another video. If you still have any confusion and queries, you can drop down your queries in the comment box and I'll reply you, inshallah. Then till then, take great care of yourself. We'll meet up again in another video. Allah Hafiz.